Welcome to Breakthrough the Ordinary podcast. You know you desire a more impactful, connected, and extraordinary life. That is why we're here to bring you stories from transformational leaders, healers, and entrepreneurs who found themselves trapped in the ordinary and are now living their most extraordinary life because of a breakthrough moment. Together, we will provide world-class tips and tools enabling you to live purposefully, aligning your heart and soul, because we believe no one should be imprisoned by their past. We are your hosts, Mark and Claudine Chamante, a sibling duo who once struggled to survive a lonely, ordinary lives until we began to utilize extraordinary healing tools and create a thriving, abundant, meaningful life that we are now very proud of. And today, on this episode of Breakthrough the Ordinary podcast, our guest is Jason Lange.
And happy to have you, Jason. He is a men's embodiment coach, group facilitator, and evolutionary guide. He helps men drop in and wake up to the deeper clarity in their lives, purpose, and relationships. He also has a podcast, Evolutionary Men, and he's quite often on Dear Men podcast, where I found him first, and he's a pretty amazing man. Really brings the truth of the masculine.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Great.
Yeah. Appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. In line with our theme, since we are Breakthrough the Ordinary, we really like to understand what was one of your major breakthroughs in your life that shifted you from the ordinary to the extraordinary, and how did you do it?
Yeah. A moment that comes up for me was it's probably 27 or so. It's about 27 years old. And I was still a virgin, and I was in a lot of pain around dating and relationships and being in my body and being comfortable with my sexuality and shame of being a virgin that old. And it was around that time I got plugged in to my first group of like really solid men who were consciously doing transformational work. And through them, went to an intensive weekend with a man who became one of my male mentors. And he did some pretty deep work with me. And, we were in a group, and he got me down. And, it was probably within 3 minutes, which is kind of crazy after, I had done a lot of talk therapy and was very conscious and like trying to do all this stuff. And in about 3 minutes, I was on my back and I was weeping uncontrollably and kind of crying in a way that I'd never cried before. And it was in that work with him that I fully came to realize the consequences of how neglected I had been as a kid, particularly from touch and particularly from just being exposed to like emotional presence. And that was the first time I felt it in my body, like just in my body of, wow, okay, it's been really hard. And I haven't even known how to touch these feelings before. And so that work with him really kind of opened me up to so much more that has been foundational for all the work I've continued to do on myself and that I love to facilitate, particularly with other men.
Thank you for sharing that vulnerability in that space. It's
thank you.
I think it's a place sometimes we all need to get to open up, that deep place. Well, what in that vein, what do you think other people need to do to break through to have the lives they want?
Yeah. So, my specialty or where I tend to get the most pumped up, I should say, is in supporting men. And as that's one of the things that most deeply supported me in my transformational journey. And, the thing that if you've heard me on the Dear Men podcast, if you've heard me on my podcast, that I tend to just ring the bell for over and over and over again is the power, which doesn't have to just be for men, but of what I would call a men's group, which there could be a women's version of that. There can be co-ed versions of that, but they're, groups that meet consciously with intention and regularity for the purpose of becoming more whole as human beings. And so part of my mission is, I think every man should be in a men's group. And I think so much of what's wrong in the world right now that would be a powerful medicine, powerful medicine that could get to the root of a lot of, I think, what drives some of the most dangerous things in the world in a lot of ways these days. So that having a place to go deep, like I had in that experience of being held, being witnessed, and in the work I do, sometimes being challenged as well, being held accountable for like, hey, you're wanting to do this thing and I notice you're not doing it. So like, what's going on? Do you really want to do that? Do you need some help? Like, what needs to happen here? So I'm a huge proponent of just finding some kind of group like that you can do work with. Because I we're kind of wired for it, just as human beings, as social creatures. And there's something energetically, because like I do one-on-one coaching as well. I've had one-on-one coaching. I've had one-on-one therapy. There's something really powerful that can happen in a group I've seen where one person will start to step into a space, which then opens it up for someone else and then opens up and there's like a deepening of the field of the circle. And oftentimes, in ways that are just never predictable, connections between experiences people have had that as they come to the surface can be such a powerful healing medicine for anyone to be in presence with someone who just gets what they've been through, understands it, and is just willing to be with them in that.
Thank you. I'm kind of thinking back to my own experiences in my life of, psychodrama and group therapies and going, yeah, you're exactly right. It doesn't always have to be my work. Being a witness and a contribution to someone else's really gave me the invitation also to step in. When you were saying that, particularly since your focus is men's group, if we could just speak into, I may not have the wording the way you do, but I think of it, right? I hold both the masculine and the feminine in this divinity. So how do you have that space for men? Like, I'm sorry, not men, for masculinity. Like, do you call it divine, masculine? And could you describe that for our listeners?
Sure. So yeah, there's a lot of ways we can label these: masculine, feminine, agency, communion, yin and yang, life and death. Like there's different descriptors for this. And, in this moment in time, I get why some people get a little charged up by masculine and feminine, because there's been a lot of cultural and societal stuff kind of mapped on top of that. But when I talk about masculinity and femininity, it's really about those deep primal energies. So they're actually like energies of the universe in a lot of ways, the creative forces behind everything, right? And that what I would identify as the feminine is really that force of life, of filling, of creation. And what I would often identify as, the masculine is kind of the opposite. It's the emptiness. It's the reduction. It's the less. It's death. And that these two energies need each other, right? They're in a perfect polarity in the way the world exists. And that, so what most of the men I tend to work with are men who identify and feel most at home in their masculine energy. But we all have both inside of us. And, oftentimes women will ask me, what do you guys do in men's group? And one of the secrets I have to reveal is actually that's often where a lot of men I know feel comfortable to drop into our feminine. So to drop more into our emotional bodies, our expression, our feeling, our figuring things out, not having to know what the next step is. And that the container of the men's group actually creates a space that feels really powerful and comfortable in. And so, at its most simple, the masculine is just the space everything arises in, right? It's just the emptiness that was there before, is there now, and will be there after. And so it's the part of us, it's the part of our consciousness that we all have that's noticing whatever's happening, right? So whether you're a man or woman or any configuration, there's a part of you that has been aware of your experience for as long as you've been alive, and most likely since before you were alive, right? And that part has never changed. So the masculine is unchanging. So divine masculine energy is just the spaciousness and the unchanging element that's just there no matter what. And so how that tends to show up, right, as it starts to become more embodied and crystallized, is we tend to identify, masculine energy with integrity, being true, being the same, with being steady, being grounded, right? These are kind of manifestations on the surface of that deeper, unchanging energy. And so I believe very deeply that a huge part of men's work is actually getting in touch with our feminine, and vice versa, that, wherever you are, you have to be able to pull from both of these. And as society continues to evolve, and we have more sexual orientations and genders, and understanding these energies actually becomes even more important, because it's not just a cultural given that, well, I'm the man, so I do this, and you're the woman, and you do this. But there's that understanding of the energetics behind that, of like, yeah, what creates, in particular, polarity, sexual chemistry, intrigue, passion with each other, and that you can flip back and forth, right? A good, I think, modern conscious couple, while both partners may have an orientation they kind of prefer, there's an ability to flex flow in the moment depending on what's needed. So, the long answer for what I think the divine masculine is, but yeah, it's that part of us that notices and that never changes, like in its most kind of esoteric sense.
I enjoyed that description, and I'm glad you went deep like that, because, and I think for people, I don't know if everybody knows it. I mean, we've been in the work, so we understand what you're coming from and clear about it. But as we're in this topic, can you share maybe what you see as the difference between healthy and toxic masculinity? I don't know if you label it toxic. There's a lot of, fire and stuff around toxic, instead of saying maybe an old way of male being, or
that I tend to lean more in that direction of, I don't believe there's such thing as toxic masculinity or toxic femininity, but I believe there's pathological versions of both, of what happens when wholeness is dropped, right? When the wholeness of being isn't fully brought online with that. And so, I'll be fully honest in saying, I think a lot of the world's problems right now stem from pathological masculinity, and that, the idea of the patriarchy and this history, like there really is something to that. And, there's been a lot of, I think, presence and attention over the last decades over the impact that's had on the planet, on women. And, one thing I'm particularly passionate about is also the impact it has on men. Like that there is a very narrow box that men are taught they have to exist within, and that it's okay to, and any straying from that, you're shamed, you're belittled, you're made to feel less than. And that's the context a lot of men are raised in that I end up working with, that one of the reasons they've learned to lone wolf it in life is because anytime they did reach out or did show some emotion, right, they were hurt for it in a lot of ways. And so, what I would say is pathological masculinity at its deepest is power disconnected from heart, with a lack of awareness of impact. So that would kind of be how I would sum it. When like there's power there, but it's disconnected. So it's disconnected from being aware of what kind of impact it's having on the world, whether that's a human being I'm with, whether that's nature and the environment, or the culture I'm part of. And that waking men up, as I like to say, waking men up and getting them to drop in, a big part of that is bringing the sensitivity of the heart back online. Like really bringing that back online, that capacity to feel ourselves and feel who we're with. And as I say, feel the moment, the environment, and what's going on. And that so much of that just isn't really offered in our culture. So men live in these tiny, teeny little boxes, and then get more and more disconnected over time. And that's when really, I think, awful things tend to happen. And, there's countless stuff happening in the world right now. And every year that as I track onto it, I'm like, just, oh my God, who did that man have or not have to just be present with him? And it feels like such a clear thing that so much damage in the world is caused by men that don't have other strong, open-hearted men calling them out, like calling them out in a loving way, calling them forward, calling them to rise up and to be more, to hold more truth and love in the world. And so it's that disconnection piece that I think is the root of what I would call a lot of pathological masculinity, and that transforming that, is certainly a big piece of what I'm most passionate about.
Tell. I have a two-part question, and one is going back to what you said earlier about, right, in a couplehood, when we have the flexibility to read, even though somebody may have a more identified energy, is how do we find that harmony and balance in ourselves, part one, and when we're in relation to other? I'm just curious of, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I can share, what's worked for me, and that's been practice and experimentation. So to find, like, what do I need? What nourishes me the most? Like, what actually nourishes me the most and allows me to show up as fully present as I can in my life, in my community, with my wife, with my daughter. And for me, in experimenting with that, it does tend to be stillness, right? Finding places I can go to be still and unplug and slow down. And I need that. Like, I need to go out in nature. I need to meditate. I need to be in stillness with other men who can appreciate that. And that nourishes me. So that's part of how I've, learned, like, okay, I kind of get that. And then that's in terms of me. And then what nourishes me on the other side is, well, I love my partner's emotional fluidity. I love her energy. I love her creativity. I love her voice. I love the fact that she takes time to dress up and make our house beautiful, right? Those aren't things that I have the impulse to do in myself in quite the same way, but I love that she's able to bring it. And so that's part of, what we've discovered in our polarity is just like, yeah, what am I most nourished by when my partner offers it? And, what am I most nourished by that I can do in my life? And then how can I most nourish her back as well? And she tends to be most nourished by my grounded, still presence, right? When I'm breathing deep, just here with her, and I'm kind of holding our family and our life in a greater context with a plan, and slowly, often imperfectly, moving us closer to that. So for me, doing this work in person was a big change for me in terms of breakthroughs, was finding spaces where I could go in and where you get to practice what is it like to do masculine style practices or feminine style practices in your body. And then, what do they feel like? Right. For me, I have a limit of how much I just want to naturally be in flow and dance and move, what would be considered more feminine oriented practice. But, throw me in the middle of a desert and I'll just sit there in peace for days or weeks, right? Like, I can do that for a long time and I can enjoy that. So there's a bit of a discovery thing there that I'm lucky because not just luck, I consciously chose a partner who wanted to explore this type of work as well. So we can talk about these things and we get to practice these things with each other and find what works best for us. And then kind of what that just like magic ratio is of, sometimes, she planned a night for me the other night. That was beautiful, where I just got to sit back and she had laid out a whole evening of activities and stuff for us that was super nourishing to me. but she doesn't want to do that every time. She wants to do that like every, seventh or eighth time. And in general, I like to nourish her by creating and holding the structure and whatnot. So I'm not quite sure if I hit it there.
You did,
but
and I'm hearing there's the communication and the allowing of the flow between the two, right? Because I feel like that's a special magic, and there's no formula. As you said, it's imperfect, and you get to learn and read each other, or because I think of I shared earlier, right? Like I've had a strong masculine energy, and I recognize it as my magnificent masculine. It's been very career driven. I'm a lesbian. It has been more my dominant, but it's also been my dominant protection. And I'm doing more embodiment work right now that really has me in touch with my divine feminine. And I'm still figuring out that dance within me, right? Because there's the natural tenacity is the, and now being like, right? Like I'm still finding that out. So never mind doing that with someone else, and reading that and being able to communicate, because I know me, know thyself first. And hearing that.
I love that. And I think what you're speaking to there is part of what's a kind of beautiful opportunity we have in becoming more conscious of both of these energies too, is that what I have found is by, doing some of the work I've done, which is really does with intent explore these different energies and practices and whatnot. Like I said, I've done a lot of feminine practice and had to like get into my body and be led by other people. And the experience of feeling how vulnerable that is, and like what it actually means to like surrender in the sense of, okay, I'm just going to give you the moment and trust. Like incredibly impactful to know what that feels like in my body and how actually powerful and like badass a thing that is, which has then changed things, because then I have so much respect on the other side of like, oh, it's not easy for my partner to just give me the keys to the moment sometimes, so to speak. And she's done enough masculine practice to realize that as well, where there's just a deep appreciation for what it takes to be the one, who's driving things more, or what it takes to be the one who's just more kind of bringing the energy and the flow in the moment. And that it does take this experimentation with ourselves to be able to appreciate that, which then makes it much easier to also, I think, appreciate it in a partner. And to be able to feel into as well, like as some of my teachers say, it's like, what does the moment call for? Where it's not even about what do I want or what does she want, but like in particular, what would serve love and consciousness in our relationship the most right now? And then, oh yeah, I should really step up into this moment. Like she needs me to really be here, like with a plan and like hold this. Or sometimes it's the opposite, or sometimes she experiences that like, wow, he's been, when I lead in particular live events and do deep work with guys, I'm mush afterwards, right? Like holding space, as I'm sure you have both experienced, like doing deep work with people. It's like when that gets done, I got nothing left to give for a little while, right? And so that's something my partner's learned to. She kind of steps in a little bit after that with a little bit more masculine energy to help take care of me in that day or two after. And that deeply nourishes me in that moment. And that's something through experience that we've just learned, right? That, okay, yeah, I'm not going to plan to take her anywhere, a day after a workshop or something like that, because I'm just not going to have my full presence with me. I just need to recover a little bit. And that it does take that flex flow, that vulnerability, and that learning that neither one is better than the other one. It's just like what is going to serve the most in the moment.
Yeah. So, wow, there's so much here. I love this stuff because I think you said you were new masculine. I think I had a lot of feminine. I think from the traumas or whatever my life history was, I was in touch with the emotion or that vulnerable place. And it was always trying to build my masculine. I had like probably the pathological masculine. So what are the benefits of men? Let's share, so people have what are the benefits of men in relationship when they do the work?
They show up in presence. They're present. That would certainly be the main thing I work with men around, in that there's a way of just, we're actually here in the moment, in our bodies, being with you, whether you're our partner, our kids, our friends, whatever. And that the willingness to just stay with you in that is a big thing that can come online for men as they take responsibility for doing their work. As in, a lot of the work I do, I have a belief that, we all kind of move through life building up these different pools of kind of emotions or kinks or trauma inside of us, of things that we weren't fully capable of being with and processing in the moment. And there's a way, they kind of like get stuck, whether that's some anger with someone in our family, or fear about something, or shame about our sexuality, or, fear of grieving because maybe we've been attacked for it before. And that, as that stuff kind of solidifies in our body in some ways, it makes it a lot harder to be present. And it makes it even harder for us to be present with those things in other people that we're uncomfortable feeling in our own bodies. And so I see this one a lot, as I continue to do this work and get deep, that, what we would often call shadow of, we get triggered by someone who's angry or sad, and we, want to make them feel better or feel differently. There's often a large piece of, because I'm not quite comfortable going there yet, right? There's a part of me that really doesn't want to feel how hard it's been, and that, I just want to cry, or that I'm actually ready to rage because so-and-so or X, Y, and Z was unfair. And that one of the benefits of the work I've seen is, personally, and certainly I've witnessed in guys I've worked with, is we become right with that stuff and learn to not fear it and become more intimate with our whole selves, then it's much easier to be present with that in other people. Like, oh yeah, you're in grief. I can be there with you in that. And it just deepens that whole cycle of presence that, that simple thing can impact just every area of life, because it's more trustable, right? And this is some of the work you can do as a man in the world. Is, people are standing in front of you and letting you know, like, I don't trust you right now, and here's why. I would need you to stand like this, or to breathe deeper. And then we start to get these signals in our body and learn what that's like. And that as we become more trustable, we make more money, we have better relationships, we have better sex. Like, just getting present in our bodies is such a game changer. And to some extent, I would argue it's never been kind of harder as well, because at the same time, we have more distractions than we've ever had, and we're often less in our bodies than we've ever been, right? So just physically, there's a lot less being in our bodies for our occupations now. And then whether it's, engineered food, social media, porn, Netflix, there's so much available in our society right now that can kind of help us put off that deeper feeling that we need to do in our bodies for days, weeks, months, and truth be told, years for a lot of people. So doing the work, obviously you can never make exact promises, but I see as guys take responsibility and go inside to do their healing work, they make more money, they get better jobs, they have better friends, and they have better relationships.
A lot of benefits.
I agree. I always say, without presence, you're not even engaged in life in a way. You're outside of life. You're not in it. So
Totally.
Thank you for speaking to that.
I know you've shared several strategies already, right? You've talked about deep stillness and dance and presence in itself. Is there other strategies that you can suggest for our listeners to continue to embody, their masculine and feminine energies?
One I'm obviously quite passionate about is spend more time around other people who can embody those energies. So as I like to say, And I think this goes for femininity as well, but masculinity is a transmission. And so one of the pain points that I think has created a lot of the pathological masculinity is that most of us aren't actually in its presence growing up, right? We don't spend a lot of time with elders, with people older than us that are embodying the healthy integrated versions of these energies. And that part of why, that work I did in my men's group and working with that teacher and everything I've done since then has been so impactful is it was the first time I would go into spaces and experience a man and be like, oh, that's it. That's where I would like to be in 20 or 30 years. The way you talk, the way you breathe, the way you move, the way you handle conflict, the way I can see you in relationship. It becomes a crystal clear kind of energetic, that's it. And men's groups, I think are a great resource for doing that, is getting around others that you can start to get that transmission of what it's like, right? And there's, to some extent, just no substitution for that. And so finding ways to get into spaces with people who, aren't necessarily more developed than you, but maybe have done a lot of work as well. You'll often find a little bit from everybody, right? There's that way that guy's handling his job and his finances. There's the way that guy's handling his relationship, and that instant transmission. It's just been so powerful for me, and part of, I think, why so many men are lost growing up, because we don't, as I tell so many of the guys I work with, we're given just the worst archetypes in our culture for masculine energy. And you might hear my daughter yelling in the background now. So, but we're given kind of the macho jerk, which most of us know, the my way, the highway, kind of brute force, just take what I want guy, who is the most disconnected, oftentimes, as I would say, from heart and from impact. The stoic, as I kind of say, which in my experience, but not in everyone's, is kind of that more classic grandfather energy of, sometimes you learn about a grandfather who went to Vietnam or was in World War II and they've never talked about it once, right? These incredibly just deep, painful things, but you would never know, because the stoic kind of just locks it all up, disconnects from it, and does whatever they need to dutifully do in life. Or the one that, I certainly know, and I think Mark knows a little bit, and many of the men I work with do, is the nice guy. I don't want to be the caveman, right? So I don't want to cause harm. So I'm going to often disconnect from my power, disconnect from my sexuality in some ways, and kind of do the nice guy thing. And none of those really get us what we want in life. And none of those really create men who can have the most deeply meaningful impact in the world. And so again, being able to spend time with other men in men's group, or other women in women's group, or just other practitioners deeply on their path, I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do, because you can learn more about how someone's body moves, quite literally, how they breathe, how they move, how they stand and flow in their body in 2 or 3 minutes than sometimes you can in reading a whole book.
Thank you.
Well, so I'm sure we could talk for hours about this stuff.
Yeah,
I love it. This is what I love. As we're coming to the end, do you have any final words of wisdom for our audience so that they can take it with them?
Yeah, I think, maybe just a bit of enthusiasm in that, one of the things that continually just fills me with gratitude and kind of blows me away is what, and you could arguably say this with different generations, but there's never been a time to be a human being quite like now, where we have as much access to tools as we do to actually create deep healing, to actually bring a level of wholeness, whether we're a man or woman, to how we're showing up in our bodies and in our relationships and in relationship to the environment now than ever before, in the sense that, as again, I work mostly with men, and as I really get into that work, it's stunning and shocking sometimes to feel the experiences men have had to have, like move through in life, how they were raised or abused or neglected, and then quickly learn about, and that goes back, like that often goes pretty far back, that their parents experienced something and their grandparents experienced something. And that, this is kind of, I think, arguably the first generation that if you want to, you can change the paradigm for your whole lineage in ways that's never been done before, between psychotherapeutic technologies, physical technologies, plant medicines, group work, podcasts, learning. Like, there's never been a better time to say, you know what? I know I can show up with more love. I know I can show up with more consciousness, and I'm going to do the healing that I need to do that. And it's pretty incredible. And it doesn't have to take forever. That's the other thing I've really been amazed by, is like, life can get a lot better really fast once you find the right medicines that your unique system needs.
Thank you, Jason. I have a new podcast to listen to. I have my own curiosity of healing. I appreciate your context and your approach. Very, very loving, and a clear message that has not fallen on my ears. At least I'm now in a space to receive. So thank you for being the giver. Yeah.
Being the man you are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Embodying it.
Well, thank you. I'll learn from some of the best, and I'm still learning every day. So that's the exciting thing, is
sure
we get to do all this together too. It's much easier in community.
Thank you for being a yes today for us and for our audience. Very grateful.
Thank you.
My pleasure.